All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. All right, share this broadcast on social media platforms. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like. Hope everybody's doing well today. So it is Monday, February 20th, 2023. And some of you all saw me on Faraji Muhammad's show, The Culture Today, on the Black Star Media Network. And at the end of our discussion, I talked about my 12-week online course that I teach on Saturdays, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Slavery they teach in school. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, it's been some time since I've done a overview or a preview of the actual content of the course. Now, a lot of people about the content of the course, and we have there's 250 slides in the class. I do a PowerPoint presentation. We have book references, articles, video clips. There's about 250 slides. There's probably about 60, 70 articles that we reference in the class. And this is a 12-week online course, okay, that I teach. Now, we can't start studying our history in slavery, even when we deal with the transatlantic slave trade. We can't start in 1619. I know the 1619 project is airing on the Hulu channel right now, but we can't start in 1619. We can't start in the 1440s with the Portuguese getting involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And the Portuguese are the first ones involved in 1441 with Anton Gonzalez going into Mauritania. We have to understand the history chronologically. And this is something that we look at in the class. We look at this history chronologically, and we go through and look at thousands of years of history and see what actually leads to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. And then we look at the slavery here, of course, in this country that we call the United States of America. We have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal. And it's going to be these teachings that the Moors take into Europe from the Nile Valley region of Africa. It's going to be these teachings that bring Europe out of the Dark Ages, okay? And then the next period that Europe enters into is called the Renaissance era, which is a period of new enlightenment. So we have to deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who entered the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD. This course not only deals with the transatlantic slave trade, but thousands of years of history that leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. August 20th, 2019 marked the 400th year anniversary of those 20 and odd Africans or 20 and odd Negroes who came into Point Comfort August 20th, 1619, in what would later be called the colony of Virginia. Now, this is on the White Lion pirate ship, which was an English pirate ship. And even though that did happen, August 20th, 1619 did happen, Africans were in the land we call the United States of America, going back at least 51,700 years. Okay. And we reference the work from Dr. David Imhotep, who wrote the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And we look at a number of different archaeological discoveries as well in the class. We look at a number of different archaeological discoveries also. Now, August 20th, 2019 marked the 400th year anniversary of those 29 Africans who came into Point Comfort in what would later be the colony of Virginia. Okay. And they come into, it's actually Hampton, Virginia, that they come into. Now, this year was known as the year of return. 2019 was known as the year of return, as many African Americans were and continue to reconnect to Africa and travel to Ghana and other West African countries. When we discuss the transatlantic slave trade, we first have to understand that African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America. Okay, African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America. And we've been in the land that we call the United States of America going back at least 51,700 years. Now, this does not mean that the transatlantic slave trade did not happen. Yes, it did. We have to understand thousands of years of history that lead up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, so I posted the link here on the thread of the broadcast. You can register for this 12-week online course. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You don't have to worry about not being in class while the session is going on or anything like that. Even after the 12-week online course is over with, a year from now, 2 years from now, you have full access. You can go watch the entire course. So visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, to register for this 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. You can also use this information with your children. I would say the content is PG-13. And I'll also share information with you how studying our history benefits our children and benefits us as a people, because there's studies that document this also. So recently we've seen attacks on the teaching of African American history and African history in public schools across the country, especially in a lot of these former Confederate states. Okay, we see the attacks going on against the Advanced Placement African American Studies course coming from the College Board, the attacks from Florida. I talked about this on the African History Network show on Sunday, February 19th, and I've been talking about this probably going back at least a month now, going back to January of 2023. College Board hits back at Florida's initial rejection of AP African American Studies course and admits it made mistakes in rollout. So we see these culture wars being played out. We see books being banned. We see Reverend Al Sharpton led a march in protest against Governor Ron DeSantis banning this Advanced Placement African American Studies course Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. Okay, so we saw that take place. We've seen after Juneteenth became a federal holiday in 2021, signing the law became a federal holiday, we started seeing a lot more articles being written about Juneteenth. And this article here from the New York Times is a very interesting article. And most Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth, poll finds. Most Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth, poll finds. And in the article, it talks about 60% of Americans know little or nothing about Juneteenth. And be quite honest with you, a lot of the information that's floating around about Juneteenth, a lot of that is inaccurate. It wasn't the last day of slavery. There's a lot. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans. So there's a lot of misinformation floating around. We see attacks on teaching. We see attacks on having Black History Month in schools also because of these anti-critical race theory laws. So in 2022, we saw a lot of stories that dealt with how it's harder to celebrate Black History Month and teach it in schools that have these new laws, these new rules. This article here from Axios.com, new rules are limiting how teachers can teach Black History Month. New rules are limiting how teachers can teach Black History Month. And then we see stories about what I call slave lessons gone wrong, or stories about slavery gone wrong. This is an article from the USA Today, mock slave auctions, racist lessons, how U.S. history class often traumatizes, dehumanizes Black students. Okay, so you have this article here that's from 2021, and then this one, Republican state lawmakers want to punish schools that teach the 1619 Project. So we see these attacks on the 1619 Project. We see these attacks on teaching African American history, African history, etc. And a lot of this has to do with white fear. A lot of this has to do with the fear of the browning of America. Okay, which is why us understanding our history is so critical right now. Yes, it should be taught in every school across the country, as Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who created Negro History Week in 1926, as he correctly stated. Yes, it should be. But what we're dealing with is the fear of the browning of America, and the fear that some white people have that by the year 2043, white people will no longer be the majority population in this country. So if we look at this article here from June 20th, 2018 from the New York Times, fewer births than deaths among whites in majority of U.S. states. Okay. And in this article from the New York Times, it talks about how deaths now outnumber births among white people in more than half the states in the country. Demographers have found signaling what could be a faster than expected transition to a future in which whites are no longer a majority of the American population. The Census Bureau, the U.S. Census Bureau, has projected that white people could drop below 50% of the population around 2045, a relatively slow-moving change that has been years in the making. But a new report this week, when this article came out, it came out in June of 2018. But a new report this week found that white people are dying faster than they are being born now in 26 states out of 50, which is up from 17 states out of 50 just 2 years prior. And demographers say that shift might come even sooner. Quote, "It's happening a lot faster than we thought. It's happening a lot faster than we thought," said Rogelio Saenz, Saenz, who is a demographer at the University of Texas at San Antonio and a co-author of the report. It examines the period from 1999 to 2016 using data from the National Center for Health Statistics, the federal agency that tracks births and deaths. He said he was so surprised at the finding that at first he thought it was a mistake. And we know one of the large contributing factors is the opioid crisis and how it's devastated a lot of white Americans in various states. Now, when you look at the 2020 census, the 2020 census was the first census since 1790 where the population of white people dropped below 60%. It was 57% in the 2020 census. You can go to census.gov and read it. Okay. So we have all this going on right now. So us understanding our history, us understanding African history, African American history is more important than ever based upon what we're dealing with. And we have to understand history, law, politics, and economics. History, law, politics, and economics, because they are all interrelated, interconnected. So when you see me on Roland Martin Unfiltered, you see me on Faraji Muhammad show, The Culture, you hear me talk about this. You listen to the African History Network show, you hear me talk about this as well. Okay, now, so the 1619 project, you've heard me talk about it. You've heard there's some good information there, but you've heard my criticisms about it. And it's important for us to understand that much of what we've been told about Virginia's 1619 first Africans is wrong. Okay. Much of what we've been told about Virginia's 1619 first Africans is wrong. There's a good article from VirginiaMercury.com from August 11th, 2019 that deals with this. And in 1619, codified slave laws didn't exist in any of the 13 colonies. And a lot of people are so shocked when they hear this. The whole way that slavery evolved in this country and even the way race evolved in this country is different than the way we actually think it evolved. Okay. I mean, that gets also in the Bacon's Rebellion, 1675, 1676, in the colony of Virginia, what happens after Bacon's Rebellion and the introduction of the term white in the colony of Virginia around 1681 to break up the alliance between enslaved Africans, free African Americans, poor whites, white indentured servants, things of this nature. That all comes to a head in Bacon's Rebellion, where you have this rebellion of 500, about 500 people of different races, different statuses, some enslaved Africans, some white indentured servants, etc. And they burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia in 1676 because they were all being exploited on the tobacco plantations in Virginia. And they realized that they had a common enemy. They were being exploited by the ruling elite. Okay, this is Bacon's Rebellion. Then you go to 1705 and the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, which is going to become a model, and other colonies are going to adopt these slave codes. And the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705 make a distinction between Negroes and Moors. So you get into this, you start dealing with a deep understanding of history, and you start seeing how all this evolves, and nationalities and status, and start seeing how all of this evolves. Okay. So the way this history actually happens is much different than the way we think it happens. So the way we talk, I like this type of information. Like on the broadcast. Okay, continue here. And we have the link here in the thread of the broadcast where you can register for this 12-week online course. It's on sale, $80, regularly $130. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they teach you in school. All right, now, Africans were in South Carolina in 1526, 93 years before Virginia. Okay, now this is not talked about a lot. We focus on 1619, and I have to tell people, you know, they say we first came to these shores 1619. No, we were here thousands of years before that. But even if you just look during the transatlantic slave trade, the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in 1526. Okay, now this is something we deal with all this in the class because we go through and look at this history chronologically. So these are all slides from the course that I teach, that I put together. I'm a historian, been studying history 32 years. I put together this curriculum as well as the second class that I teach, which is from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1800 to 1968, which goes through and goes deep into looking at that 168-year period of history and analyzing what happened to us also after slavery ended. Okay, now before 1619, there was 1526, the mystery of the first enslaved Africans in what became the United States. There's a good article from Washington Post, September 7th, 2019, September 7th, 2019, that deals with this history. 1526 is not talked about a lot. Okay. And you had those Africans, there's going to be an uprising. They're going to overthrow their oppressors and they're going to run away. And it's believed they went to live with Native Americans. So it was the Spanish tried to set up the settlement, but it was a failed settlement. Now, Spanish explorers brought 100 African slaves to a doomed settlement in South Carolina or Georgia. Within weeks, the subjugated revolted, then vanished. Maybe that's why they don't want us to know about 1526, because those Africans overthrew their oppressors. So maybe that's why that's not talked about a lot. But that's 93 years before Jamestown, Virginia. And then in 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon, the Spanish conquistador, comes into Florida, and he has an African with him named Juan Garrido. Juan Garrido was born in West Africa around 1480. And Juan Garrido is probably the first African we know of by name, in this land that we call the United States of America, or what Native Americans call Turtle Island. And Dr. David Imhotep talks about Turtle Island in the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. Okay, so we look at different African, some different African civilizations, ancient African civilizations like ancient Nubia. And we look at African empires besides Egypt that Europeans and Arabs tried to claim as their own. One of them is ancient Nubia, okay, or Ta-Nehisi, which existed from about 4500 BC to 500 AD. And Nubia is the mother of ancient Kemet. Nubia is the mother of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Okay, because and Abyssinia or Ethiopia is the grandmother. So to understand ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, you have to understand Nubia and understand Ethiopia. Now, ancient Nubia or Ta-Seti or Ta-Nehesi, also known as Kush, which was more of a region. Kush was more of a region than a kingdom. And some of that also depends upon which period of time you're talking about as well. But ancient Nubia was a region along the Nile River located in northern Sudan and southern Egypt or southern Kemet. Okay. And today, the lower portion of Egypt and the upper portion of the Sudan, that is where Nubia was. Okay. The geographical demarcations that we see in on the map that we see in Africa, the 54 African nations, those largely come from the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. Okay. The Berlin Conference, the conference to divide Africa. There's a good article that I referenced, the interview that I did with Professor James Small. And we talked about, I think it was in the interview where we talked about the Woman King. There was a good, there's a good article from thought.co. Okay. And it's on the Berlin Conference. This one right here. The Berlin Conference to divide Africa. The colonization of the continent by European powers. This article is from June 30th, 2019. And it goes in, deals with some of the history of these 14 European nations having this conference in Berlin, Germany. And they carve up Africa into colonies. Okay, they carve up Africa into colonies. This is one of the ways how Great Britain got so much territory in Africa from the Berlin Conference also. Okay, so check this out. This deals with the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. There was no African representation at the Berlin Conference. Okay, there was no African representation at the Berlin Conference. These were all Europeans. Now, so when we look at Nubia, it was home to some of Africa's earliest kingdoms, known for rich deposits of gold. Nubia was a major trading port for luxury goods that came from sub-Saharan Africa, such as incense, ivory, and ebony. The first monarchy of recorded history was established in Nubia. The Nubians were also known for their exceptional archery skills that provided the military strength for their rulers. Kings of Nubia ultimately conquered and ruled Egypt for about a century, for about 100 years. Monuments still stand in modern Egypt and Sudan at the sites where Nubian rulers built cities, temples, and royal pyramids. Now, also, there are twice as many, when we look at the Sudan today, there are twice as many pyramids in the Sudan as there are in Egypt. Okay, there are over 200 pyramids in the Sudan. Okay, there are twice as many in the Sudan as there are in Egypt, because the Sudan, Nubia, was the mother of ancient Kemet. Okay, now in the 1800s, the Western world's interest in Nubia was awakened by the rediscovery of the ancient empire's monuments, which were reported almost simultaneously by individual British, French, and American explorers. Many of them found it difficult to credit indigenous Africans for building such a civilization. So they tried to say that the Nubians were white as well, just like they tried to say that the ancient Egyptians were white, or some of them said that, some of the archaeologists said the ancient Egyptians were brown skinned Caucasians or something like this, or they tried to say they were Semites, anything but black Africans. They could not admit that these were Negroes. Okay, they could not admit that these were black Africans. They had to be Semites. They had to be brown-skinned Caucasians, biracial, triracial, something like that. All right, in this this clip right here, you have a scientist, a white scientist, disappointed when he finds out that ancient Egyptian pharaohs were Black Africans. They did the scientific analysis, and he had to admit that they were Black Africans. He was disappointed when it happened. This was from this clip was from the History Channel, and we actually posted this on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. He got thousands of likes and went viral. Now, during the 1840s, German Egyptologist Carl Richard Lepsius, Lepsius, asserted confidently that the Greek term Ethiopian, when referring to ancient civilized people of Kush, did not apply to Negroes, but was used to describe the reddish-skinned people closely related to the Egyptians who belonged to the Caucasian race. Okay, they do whatever they can to discredit it. They don't want to admit these are Black Africans. Now, Nubia was the first recorded monarch in history. Ancient Egypt is the first major civilization in Africa for which records are abundant. It was not, however, Africa's first kingdom. A March 1st, 1979 New York Times front page article written by journalist Boyce Rensberger reported, quote, evidence of the oldest recognizable monarchy in human history preceding the rise of the earliest Egyptian kings by several generations has been discovered in artifacts from ancient Nubia, by ancient Nubia, end quote. Now, the artifacts including hundreds of fragments of pottery, jewelry, stone vessels, and ceremonial objects such as incense burners were initially recovered from the Cusco Cemetery by Keith C. Seal, a professor at the University of Chicago. Okay, so then we look at the Punic Wars, and we look at civilizations like Carthage and the Carthaginians and their fight against the Romans in the three Punic Wars as well. Now, we know Carthage is in North Africa. It's in the area that today is Tunisia. We look at Hannibal Barca, okay, who was a Carthaginian, one of the greatest military strategists in history. He became a general at the age of 26. So we go through and look at that and the Punic Wars and their fight against Rome. We look at the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC, where Hannibal Barca defeats the Roman army, and the Roman army, they lose about 70,000 soldiers in one day. Is looked at one of the greatest military victories in history. We know that Carthage is going to exist from 816 BCE, before the Common Era, or BC, to 146 BC. Carthage is going to be destroyed by Rome in 146 BC. And you also deal with Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus in the Second Punic War. And after the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, when Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus defeats Hannibal Barca, is going to be was Publius Cornelius Scipio at this point, is going to be after the Battle of Zama that Scipio takes the surname Africanus. Africa was not named after Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus. He took his surname after the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. And I go through and we deal with linguistics and understand language in the class also, because Africa is a Latin word. Ca is a Latin suffix denoting land. The prefix Afri refers to the Afri, who are a group of Black African people in Algeria and Tunisia. That area where Tunisia used to be called Carthage. Okay, so in Africa means land of the Afri. Okay, it's not named after a Roman general. Africa was not named after a Roman general at all. So as you get deep into the history, then you start studying language and seeing how it relates to history. And a lot of these myths that are being pushed fall apart. Carthage was founded in the 9th century BCE, before the Common Era, on the Gulf of Tunis. From the 6th century BCE onwards, it developed into a great trading empire covering much of the Mediterranean and was home to a brilliant civilization. In the course of the long Punic Wars from 264 BCE to 146 BC, Carthage occupied some of Rome's territories before finally being destroyed by its rival in 146 BCE. Now, in his book, World's Great Men of Color, Volume 1, history scholar J.A. Rogers asserts that the Carthaginians were descendants of the Phoenicians, a Negroid people, and that, in fact, until the rise of the doctrine of white superiority. Now, this is extremely important because on the History Channel in 2016, they had a series called Barbarians Rising, and I watched it, Barbarians Rising, and it dealt with 700 years of invasions in the Roman Empire, okay, leading to the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, when the western portion, I should say the fall of the western portion of the Roman Empire, 476 AD, when the Vandals and the Visigoths crushed the western portion of the Roman Empire. Okay, so you had Nicholas Pennock, this actor Nicholas Pennock, portraying Hannibal Barca because Hannibal was an African man. And you had white people, some white people on social media, not all of them. You had some white people losing their minds saying that the History Channel was lying and that Hannibal was white and the Carthaginians were white, things of this nature. This is because of these lies that have been told. And Carthage is one of those African empires that Europeans tried to claim as their own. No, these were black African people. These are descendants of the Phoenicians. Okay, so J.A. Rogers in World's Great Men of Color, Volume 1, said that the Carthaginians were descendants of the Phoenicians, a Negroid people, and that, in fact, until the rise of the doctrine of white superiority, Hannibal Barca was traditionally known as a black man. Now, some people may be confused. They may be thinking about Hannibal on the A-Team with B.A. Baracus and the Face Man and Murdoch or something like that. They may be thinking of George Papard as Hannibal, or they may be thinking of Hannibal Lecter or something. No, no, Hannibal Barca was black African. He was not a European. Okay, now today, many encyclopedias classify the Carthaginians as whites or Semites, but ancient Greek and Roman eyewitness accounts paint a different picture. The indigenous peoples of Carthage were called the Afirs, A-F-E-R-S, the Afirs. Ancient Roman poet Virgil, in his poem Mortem, speaks of a woman from the Afir or Afra race, okay, of the Afar, from the Afir, A-F-E-R, Afar or Afra race, A-F-R-A, and he says of her, and all her figure proves her native land. Her hair was curly, thick her lips, and dark her color. Now, in Library of History book 20, Greek historian Diodorus mentions a Greek lieutenant named Agathocles who defeated a people in the area of present-day Tunisia in North Africa, present-day Tunisia, who were the same hue as the Ethiopians. Now, yes, Europeans also try to say that Ethiopians were white. And when Emperor Menelik II defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adwa in March of 1896, the Italians told the world that the Ethiopians were white because they didn't want the world to know that they were defeated by these African people. So when you go research the Battle of Adwa, March 1896, you see that the Italians were embarrassed. So they lied and said the Ethiopians were white. And, you know, some years ago when I was doing research on the mythology of Andromeda and Cassiopeia, There are two constellations named Andromeda and Cassiopeia, but they're named after mythological African women. And this comes out of, you have them in Greek mythology, but these were African women, because we know, like Zeus, who's the king of the gods in Greek mythology, Zeus, according to Greek mythology, they tell you Zeus came from Ethiopia. Okay, because Zeus was African. But I was researching Andromeda and Cassiopeia, and I came across a painting that dealt with this mythology, and the painting depicted the king of Ethiopia as being a Greek, as being European, and it was showing the people in the painting as being European. And it was depicting Andromeda, Cassiopeia, things like this as Europeans. So I'm sitting there looking at this painting. It was a picture of the painting online. I'm looking at this. So I called Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene. Professor Kaba, some of you have seen or heard some of the interviews I've done with Professor Kaba. He's in the Hidden Colors documentaries. We're in the Black Friday documentaries together. And I said, look, I said, I'm doing research on the mythology of Andromeda and Cassiopeia. And I came across this painting that depicts the king of Ethiopia as being white. I said, when did the Greeks conquer Ethiopia? I don't remember that. He said they didn't. He said they didn't. They just conquered them in the artwork. So if you come across this painting and you see the king of Ethiopia depicted as a European, and you see Andromeda and Cassiopeia depicted as Europeans, then either one, you think the ancient Ethiopians were white, or you'll think that the Greeks conquered the Ethiopians. And both of them are wrong. But this deals with the colonization of mythology, the colonization of image. And as J.A. Rogers said in World's Great Men of Color, okay, the Carthaginians were descendants of the Phoenicians, a Negroid people, and that, in fact, until the rise of the doctrine of white superiority, Hannibal Barca was traditionally known as a black man, because as you have a rise in European powers, you have a rise in white superiority. You have Europeans who reinterpret a lot of these mythological images and religious images. So we know that they were worshiping the Black Madonna Child, okay, all throughout Europe. And there are over 300 images of the Black Madonna Child in France. France probably has the most number of images, paintings and statues and things like this of the Black Madonna Child. And this was being worshipped even before the African Moors go into Europe, because this comes from Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. This gets into a deep history, which takes you right back to ancient Africa and takes you back to the Nile Valley region of Africa. But as Europeans are going out conquering people's lands in the 1400s, they're going out conquering people's lands. They're recovering from the Black Death, the bubonic plague, which hit Europe in spurts from 1347 to 1400. And Europe loses between a quarter to a third of their population as they're going into the Caribbean and setting up sugarcane plantations, and they're rebuilding Europe, and they're extracting the mineral wealth and extracting Africans out of Africa and enslaving them, things like this. You start seeing a reinterpretation of a lot of these different figures, images, etc. And as you have a rise in European powers, you have a rise in the dominance of the European phenotype. And we go from the Black Madonna Child to the decolorized version of that with the white Mary and Jesus. Okay. All right, Kate. Now, how do you all like this type of information? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And we have the information right on the homepage of the website. 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So this class is on sale, $80 right now. Our next class is Saturday, March 4th, 2023, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register for the full course. So I do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. Even after the 12-line course is over with, you can go back and watch the entire course as much as you want to. You'll have full access. All right. And then we also have a bundle pack where you get both classes that I teach on sale for $120. That's a $300 value. There will be 5 of my lectures that will be in the video library when you log into your account, and you'll be able to watch 5 of my lectures as a free bonus as well. Now, the second class that I teach deals with history from 1800 to 1968. And this is Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution to the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. So I teach this class on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our next class is Sunday, March 5th, 2023. And with this course here, we study in depth this 168, 170 year period of history. Okay. This is a 12-week online course as well. Same structure as the first class. Click right here to register here. And we have to understand that history leading up to the Civil War, what led up to the Civil War taking place, but then also understand what happened after slavery ended as well. Okay. And this helps us understand how we got to where we are today. What were the laws and policies? That were put in place to put us in the predicament that we're in today? All right, let's continue. And we definitely appreciate your support, because this helps finance the African History Network. This helps support the African History Network. Helps us keep broadcasting the radio show, do the research, pay some of the bills, etc., because it takes a lot to do all of this. Okay, so how you all like this type of information? Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on the broadcast. You can post your comments here also. Are you learning anything from this class, from this class overview? Okay, so we have Carthage. Europeans try to claim Carthage for themselves also, and we deal with Carthage in the class. And the Punic Wars, we talk about Namibia also, which existed from about 202 BC to 46 BC, because we go through and we'll look at different African civilizations. We'll go through and look at a chronology of thousands of years of history. Now, Namibia was another great Black Berber Libyan nation in northern Algeria during the time of the Romans and Carthaginians. It began as a sovereign state and later alienated and later alternated status between a Roman province and a Roman client state. It is considered to be the first major state in the history of Algeria and the Berber world. Okay, it's considered to be the first major state in the history of Algeria and the Berber world. All right. Now, Namibia has also been classified by European and Arab historians as a Caucasian or Semitic built civilization. However, in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, Dr. Chancellor Williams declared that Libya was once so nearly all Black that to be called a Libyan meant that one was Black. Okay. Libya was once so Black that to be called a Libyan meant that one was Black. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing about Libya in his Histories, Book 4, stated, quote, "One thing I can add about this country, so far as one knows, it is inhabited inhabited by 4 of which 2 are not. The indigenous people are the Libyans and the Ethiopians. The Libyans and the Ethiopians. The former, the Libyans, occupying the northerly, and the latter, the more southerly parts. The immigrants are the Phoenicians and the Greeks. Now, one of the most famous Berber Moors of the Roman times was Massinissa, the king of Namibia, who assisted the Romans against the Carthaginians during the Punic Wars. Okay, so he teamed up with the Romans to help defeat the Carthaginians. And when you study Hannibal Barca and the Punic Wars, you read about the Numidians siding with the Romans. Okay, all right, now evidence that proves that African people sailed to the Americas long before Columbus. There's a good article from the AtlantaBlackStar.com that deals with this history. And we deal with, there's about 60 or 70 articles that we reference in the class. There's 7 books that we reference also in the course. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along. I use the books as reference, and we scan the pages and show you the text on the screen. But we can look at from Christopher Columbus himself, because Columbus kept a diary. According to renowned American historian and linguist Leo Weiner of Harvard University, one of the strongest pieces of evidence to support the fact that African people or Black people sailed to America before Christopher Columbus was a journal entry from Columbus himself. In Leo Weiner's book, Africa and the Discovery of America, he explains that Columbus noted in his journal that the Native Americans confirmed, quote, black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats trading in gold-tipped spears. Black-skinned people had come from the southeast in boats trading in gold-tipped spears. Now, the discovery of American narcotics in Egyptian mummies has also left some historians amazed. Recently, archaeologists discovered the presence of narcotics only known to be derived from American plants in ancient Egyptian mummies. These substances included South American cocaine from erythroxylon and nicotine from Nicotiana tabacum. German toxicologist Svelta Balabanova reported the findings, which suggests that such compounds made their way to Africa through transatlantic trade that would predate Christopher Columbus' arrival by thousands of years. Now, we know Columbus never came to the land we call the United States of America. The closest he comes here is 90 miles away, but he's in the Caribbean. He's in Central America. So he's in the Americas, but he never comes to the land we call the United States of America. Now, if we look at Egyptian artifacts in North America, for years, Eurocentric archaeologists have largely turned a blind eye when it came to the discovery of artifacts from ancient Egypt being discovered in the Americas. According to my friend, Dr. David Imhotep, the author of the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, quote, Egyptian artifacts found across North America, from the Algonquin writings on the East Coast to the artifacts and Egyptian place names in the Grand Canyon, end quote, are all signs of an early arrival in the Americas by Africans. This is also paired with a much earlier account of Black people with incredible skills at sea, seafaring, sailing. Now, back in 445 BC, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote of King Ramses III leading a team of Africans at sea with astounding seafaring and navigational skills. Together, both accounts would point to African sailing over to the New World before Columbus. So we deal with the Olmec heads in Mexico, in Central America, and who were the Olmecs. Also, we go through, once again, we go throughout thousands of years of history, look at these different civilizations. Dr. David Imhotep in The First Americans Were Africans talks about the Mandinka Egyptian Olmec connection. He said, quote, a major ethnic group among the ancient Egyptian Nubians were the Manding people, an original Niger Congo homeland in the general vicinity of the Upper Nile Valley is probably as good a hypothesis as for the origin of the Manding. The Proto-Manding migration had to have taken place during the African Aqualithic period. That was a wet period in Africa that lasted thousands of years at a time when the Sahara was fertile and had river systems and Great Lakes. The Nile flowed west across the Sahara and emptied into the Atlantic Ocean during very ancient times. This would have enabled East Africans direct access to the Atlantic Ocean. The longer route would be to sail to the Nile River, to the Mediterranean Sea, and then head west to the Atlantic Ocean. When the Manding reached Central America and began mixing with the local population, they were labeled Olmecs. When the Manding reached Central America and began mixing with the local population, they were labeled Olmecs. A mixture of the Man or Mandinka and other Indians or American Indians. Do not forget that the Manding made the basics, so the Egyptians, the main and the base of the Olmecs of each other. So he talks on page 2 of The First Americans Were Africans documents. You all have seen the numerous interviews I've done with Dr. David M. And let me refresh the screen right here. Okay, we're back. I had to refresh the screen there. Okay, so can everybody, you all should be able to hear me okay? All right, so when the Manding reached Central America and began mixing with the local population, they were labeled Olmecs. The Olmecs were supposedly a mixture of the Manding or Mandinka and American Indians or Amerians. Do not forget that the Manding made up the base of the Olmecs, so the Egyptians, the Manding, and the base of the Olmecs are related to each other. Okay, this comes from page 82 of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep. His book is a fantastic book, and his first book is out of print. The second book came out in 2021. And that's available at Amazon. The First Americans Were Africans, revised and expanded. Now, in 1311 AD, thousands of years after the Olmec arrived, the Mandinkan Muslim Abu Bakr II sailed 2,000 ships from Mali, West Africa, in the Atlantic, headed west. When they reached South America, they left signs on the rocks at the mouths of rivers, warning followers of dangerous or friendly natives. So Dr. David Imhotep talks about this on page 88 of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. There's also a good article from face-to-faceafrica.com called Way Before Columbus, Ancient Malayans Sailed to the Americas in 1311 AD, Common Era, face-to-faceafrica.com from December 5th, 2018. In this article, It says, according to a number of sources, Abubakar II, Mansa, which means king, Mansa of the Mali Empire in the 14th century, led Malayan sailors to the Americas, specifically present-day Brazil, almost 200 years before Christopher Columbus arrived. Abubakar II ruled what was arguably the richest and largest empire on earth, covering nearly all of West Africa. The BBC reported in the article, Africa's Great Explorer, which came out December 13th, the year 2000, on the saga of Abubakar II, he left with 2,000 boats, by Malayan scholar Gausu Diawara, notes Abubakar wanted to find out whether the Atlantic Ocean, like the great river Niger that swept through Mali, had another bank. He had traveled extensively throughout and outside of the African continent, already owning most of the continent. His predecessor and uncle, Sundiata Keita, had already founded the Mali Empire and conquered a good stretch of the Sahara Desert and the great forests along the West African coast. Okay, so we look at West Africa and Ghana, Songhai, and Mali, but also Mansa Musa is also related. There's a relation between Mansa Musa and the fictitious character of T'Challa in Black Panther in Wakanda. Now, there's a good article from history.com, the official website of the History Channel, that talks about this, okay? Because we deal with the film Black Panther in the course, because Black Panther relates to African history, African culture, African language, African spiritual systems. There are 11 different African cultures that are infused into the film Black Panther. Ruth Carter, who was the costume designer, she studied African cultures for 6 months. Okay, Ruth Carter, who won an Oscar for her costume designing for the film Black Panther. And she incorporated 11 different African cultures into the movie. Okay, so this article here talks about, from the history.com, it says, in the vast fictional universe of Marvel Comics, T'Challa, better known as Black Panther, is not only king of Wakanda, he's also the richest superhero of them all. And although the title of wealthiest person alive involves a tug of war between billionaire CEOs, the wealthiest person in history, Mansa Musa, has more in common with Marvel's first black superhero. Mansa Musa became ruler of the Mali Empire in 1312 Common Era, or AD, taking the throne after his predecessor, Abubakar II, for whom he'd serve as deputy, went missing on a voyage he took by sea to find the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. Mansa Musa's rule came at a time, now this is extremely important right here. Mansa Musa's rule came at a time when European nations were struggling due to raging civil wars and a lack of resources. Okay, so Europe was dealing with poverty, famine, disease, civil wars, things like this, while West Africa is thriving, while the Mali Empire is thriving. During this period, the Mali Empire flourished thanks to ample natural resources like gold and salt. So this article is entitled This 14th Century African Emperor Remains the Richest Person in History. This is from history.com, the official website of the History Channel, March 19th, 2018. So we know the character of Black Panther, T'Challa, was introduced in Fantastic Four issue 52, July of 1966. And it was a 2-part series. And in this comic book, in the first part of the story, T'Challa defeats the Fantastic Four in their own comic book. Okay. And this was the first time we saw like an African superhero like this, or a black superhero like this. And he talks about at the end of issue 52, as you see, the hereditary chieftain of the Wakandans, of the Wakandas, and perhaps the richest man in all the world, Okay, now the Panther deity of Bast that we see in the movie, the Panther deity that watches over Wakanda, that comes from Bastet, which was a neter or deity in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, that was in the form of a lioness, okay, and then later a cat. Ancient Egyptian goddess worshipped in the form of a lioness and later a cat, goddess of warfare in Lower Egypt, worshipped as early as Second Dynasty, around 2890 BCE, before the Common Era. Okay, so the film is so deep because it helps reconnect us to African history, African culture, African language, etc. The language spoken in the film Black Panther is isiXhosa, which is a real African language spoken in Southern Africa. And isiXhosa has the click sounds in it also. And we know the click language was the original language. We know that with the Wakandan salute comes straight out of ancient Kemet. That's as always, right over left. And that is the symbol, that's the pose of the Nasubites, or the pharaohs in the sarcophagi, the painted coffins, the sarcophagi is right over left. Is the symbol of power, symbol of royalty. And we see that, go all around the world as well. Now, Wakanda is a real word. Wakanda basically means possesses secret powers, and we see the word Wakanda in the Omaha, Ponca, and Sioux Indian languages also. Wakanda is not something just made up. It's a real word. Ruth Carter did a hell of a job on the costume design for the film Black Panther. She was also the costume designer on the film Malcolm X as well. But one of the African influences we see in the film Black Panther, and we go through and study the film Black Panther in the class because there's so much there. And I've done lectures. Well, first of all, I did 3 months of research on the first Black Panther movie to be able to do my lectures on the film Black Panther. And I incorporate a lot of that into this class. Okay. So how do you all like this type of information so far? Post your comments here. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a heart. Give us a like on this broadcast. The Basotho, who are from Lesotho, which is an enclave inside of South Africa. It's a country within a country. They have these blankets that we saw incorporated into Black Panther. These are cultural blankets, the Basotho heritage blankets. These blankets have a deep cultural significance and history. The world-renowned Basotho tribal blankets distinguish this nation from others by the way in which the blankets are worn as part of their everyday life. The designs have been developed over many years with the blessing of the Lesotho royal family. We also see the Ndebele of South Africa represented, also with the gold rings worn around the necks of the Dora Milaje. Okay. And then we see the Ovahimba of Namibia represented in the hairstyle of one of the elders when they are on the side of the mountain and they're watching the ritual combat that was taking place. So at the beginning of the movie, the ritual combat between T'Challa and M'Baku. Okay, that ritual combat comes straight from the comic book, and it takes place at what's called Warrior Falls. That's the name of that waterfalls. It's called Warrior Falls. That's straight out of the Black Panther comic book and Jungle Action comic book. And this is where the ritual combat takes place to determine who's going to sit on the throne of Wakanda. So we go through, and these are all different aspects of the course that I put together that we deal with. Okay, to better understand African history, to better understand ourselves, to better understand African American history. The hat that Angela Bassett's character, Queen Ramonda, who's actually T'Challa's stepmother, if you understand the storyline, because his birth mother dies a few days after he gives birth. That comes from South Africa. Okay, that flat disc hat is a Isicolo. Angela Bassett as Queen Mother Ramonda makes an entrance with a large disc headdress. In most of her scenes, she wears a smaller version of the hat, which Ruth Carter borrowed from Zulu culture. The Isicolo is a hat worn by married women and was traditionally shaped from grass fronds with cotton woven through. Their sizes and colors differ between clans, at times reaching a meter in diameter. For Black Panther, Ruth Carter had Ramonda's dramatic white Isicolo 3D printed according to an interview with Vanity Fair. And here's a picture of her with the Isicolo right here. Okay. All right. And then we know that the costumes of the Dora Milaje are inspired by the Maasai of Kenya. Okay. And the dress of the Maasai of Kenya and the colors from the Kenya as well, from the Maasai as well. The Dora Milaje with their deep red armor and tall spears look like Maasai warriors, which was the look that Ruth Carter was going for. The Maasai shuka is instantly recognizable as the red and blue checkered, sometimes with black, yellow, or green, but red is always the base color. And this is the shawl draped over the semi-nomadic Maasai. Okay, so there's so many African influences in the film Black Panther. We use Dr. David Imhotep's book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, as a reference. He's a friend of mine. I've interviewed him like 13, 14 times. So some of you all have seen the interviews I've done with him as well, or heard the interviews on the African History Network show. Page 14 of his book deals with a discovery made in Allendale County, South Carolina in 2004 by Dr. Albert Goodyear. And they found 13 different types of evidence that thoroughly documented African presence in the Americas, dating back at least 51,700 years ago. They found artifacts, architecture, campsites, carvings, Egyptian writings, footprints in lava, genetic M174D haploid groups dealing with DNA and genetics, linguistics, paintings, skulls, skeletons, structures, and tools. They found 13 different types of evidence documenting an African presence in the land we call the United States of America, dating back at least 51,700 years ago. Now, his book is backed up by 713 footnotes and 7 peer-reviewed articles as well. And we know peer-reviewed articles is the height of academia. So these Africans were the Khoisan, who have the oldest DNA on the planet. They're the short-statured Africans. They go all around the world. They're the ancestors to the Ainu and Atwa, and they were here also. This is Dr. Albert Goodyear. He's a white archaeologist from the University of South Carolina. This article from ScienceDaily.com in November 18, 2004, entitled New Evidence Puts Man in North America 50,000 Years Ago. This talks about his discovery. Okay, ScienceDaily.com, they have all type of archaeological discoveries, scientific discoveries, etc. there. So the Khoisan, in an October 2012 genetic study published in Science magazine, it found that the Khoisan in Southern Africa are the oldest ethnic group of modern humans, the oldest ethnic group of modern humans, with their ancestral line originating about 100,000 years ago. The Khoisan, formerly called by the derogatory term Bushmen, are genetically unique, and no other currently known population has separated so early from our common modern human ancestor, according to the report. Now, here are a couple of Khoisan sisters, also a couple of Khoisan African women. Now, the Khoisan live mainly in southern Africa in territories spanning Botswana, Namibia, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. They are largely divided into two groups: hunters and gatherers, known as the Sans people, and keepers of the livestock, known as the Khoikhoi. The Khoisan languages include the distinctive click sounds that aren't found in the languages of their neighbors. There's a good article from AtlantaBlackStar.com called 5 Ethnic Groups That Prove the First Humans Were Black. Okay, so when we look at this land historically, there were 1 million mounds in this land. And yes, Native Americans built some of those mounds, but Africans also built them as well. At least 10,000 years ago, during the African Aqualithic period, the mound builders of Africa, the Proto-Manding, were building habitation mounds to live upon even before the Manding built their mounds along the Niger River. These Proto-Saharan people also built dams, boats, and mounds to escape the waters in case of flooding. There are also large erections formerly called Native American mounds, now known to be African mounds, that are shaped like pyramids that are found across North America. The largest ones surviving today are in the Mississippi Valley. The largest of all was the Cahokia Mound, that's in East Illinois, Cahokia, near the area where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers converge. Now, Cyrus Thomas, director of the Eastern Mound Division of the Smithsonian Institute's Bureau of Ethnology in 1881, said, quote, distinct from the American Indians, there was a race of mound builders in America distinct from the American Indians. Now, there were 1 million, end quote, there were 1 million Indian mounds in North America. Today, there are only about 100,000. If you read pages 71 through 74, the first Americans were Africans, documented evidence by Dr. David Imhotep. He talks about these mounds. So we go through and look at all this history. We look at this history chronologically, thousands of years of history. We also look at archaeological discovery. So in our class on Saturday, our next class on Saturday, we're going to look at some archaeological discoveries. Class 2 and 3 will look at archaeological discoveries. This is a big one that came out in June 2017 that blew everybody away. Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And we have the information right on the homepage of the website. 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So this class is on sale, $80 right now. Our next class is Saturday, March 4th, 2023, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register for the full course. So I do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. Even after the 12-line course is over with, you can go back and watch the entire course as much as you want to. You'll have full access. All right. And then we also have a bundle pack where you get both classes that I teach on sale for $120. That's a $300 value. There will be 5 of my lectures that will be in the video library when you log into your account, and you'll be able to watch 5 of my lectures as a free bonus as well. Now, the second class that I teach deals with history from 1800 to 1968. And this is Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution to the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. So I teach this class on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our next class is Sunday, March 5th, 2023. And with this course here, we study in depth this 168, 170 year period of history. Okay, this is a 12-week online course as well. Same structure as the first class. Click right here to register here. And we have to understand that history leading up to the Civil War, what led up to the Civil War taking place, but then also understand what happened after slavery ended as well. Okay, and this helps us understand how we got to where we are today. What were the laws and policies? That were put in place to put us in the predicament that we're in today? So this archaeological discovery came out and it blew away the archaeological world. We're older than we thought. New find pushes human origin back 100,000 years. This is from NBCnews.com. June 7th, 2017. June 7th, 2017. Modern humans evolved much earlier than previously thought, researchers reported on Wednesday. New discoveries at a rich site in Morocco show modern humans were hunting and probably cooking game animals 300,000 years ago. 100 have believed until now. Okay. Until now. So this is over 100,000 years earlier than the discovery in Ethiopia that dates back about 195,000 years ago. New discoveries and new dating methods show that, in fact, many of the bones belong to modern Homo sapiens, and they lived as far back as 300,000 or 350,000 years ago. The earliest previous Homo sapiens bones date back 195,000 years ago, and they're from clear across the continent in modern-day Ethiopia. Taken together, the findings show modern humans were dispersed across Africa long before anyone ever thought. So the deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets, the more research they do, the older we get. And what these archaeological discoveries are showing is that all of this is much older than we actually thought. African people are older than we thought. We were migrating out of East Africa earlier than we thought. We were here in this land we call the United States of America much earlier than we thought. We did not first come here conquered and shackled and chained by Europeans. No, this was our land stolen from us. This article from February 2010, New York Times, on Crete, new evidence of very ancient mariners. It talks about how stone tools were found on the Greek island of Crete over the course of 2 summers, and these stone tools date back 130,000 years ago, which pushes maritime sailing in the Mediterranean back thousands of years. It causes them to have to rethink everything, push the timeline back. The deeper they dig, the blacker the planet gets, the more research they do, the older we get. This study right here deals with how positive feelings about blackness improve academic performance for Black girls. This is why this type of information is so important, not just for African Americans, but also for our youth. Believing that Black is beautiful, an important mantra of self-acceptance and self-love, could pay major dividends in school, a new study finds. An article in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education, an article in the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education focuses on a new study from Sharita Butler Barnes, a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, which finds that young Black women with strong racial identity are more likely to be academically engaged, curious, and persistent. The survey looked at 733 Black middle and high school girls in the 3 socioeconomically school districts in the Midwest. The study, called Promoting Resilience Among African American Girls, Racial Identity as a Protective Factor, was published on the Child Development Journal website, and found that feeling positive about being Black, along with feeling supported by their schools, correlated with the girls' greater academic motivation. Researchers also found that feeling good about your racial identity could act as a buffer for students in hostile or negative academic environments. Researchers also found that feeling good about your racial identity could act as a buffer for students in hostile or negative academic environments. Persons of color who have unhealthy racial identity beliefs tend to perform lower in school and have more symptoms of depression, end quote, Professor Sharita Butler Barnes noted. She went on to say, we found that feeling positive about being Black and feeling support and belonging at school may be especially important for African American girls, classroom engagement, and curiosity. Feeling connected to the school may also work together with racial identity attitudes to improve academic outcomes. Read this article here from theroot.com. New studies find that positive feelings about blackness improve academic performance for black girls. This is from January 10th, 2018 from theroot.com. Now, this article here from blackamericaweb.com from 2012, this dealt with how, this dealt with a study that showed how TV watching kills black boys' self-esteem. TV watching, excessive TV watching, kills black boys' self-esteem. A new study, a new, precise, and exhaustive year-long study finds that watching television regularly distorts and ultimately destroys the self-esteem of young black males, who often find themselves comparing one another to the characters they view on air, leaving them feeling trapped and as if there are, quote, very few positive life paths they can aspire to, end quote. So there are numerous outlets that ran this story. This particular one comes from blackamericaweb.com, July 14, 2012. So then we have this study right here. This is a joint study by the University of Pittsburgh and Harvard University. It deals with how African-American teens with racial pride do better in school. And University of Pittsburgh has an article, Can Instilling Racial Pride in Black Teens Lead to Better Educational Outcomes? Pitt University study shows racially conscious parenting strategies can be the key to student success in school. AfricanGlobe.net has the article, Black Teens with Racial Pride Do Better in School, from January 1st, 2013. African-American teenagers perform better academically when their parents instill in them a sense of racial pride. A new study by the University of Pittsburgh and Harvard University, Harvard University, shows that when parents use racial socialization, such as talking to their children or engaging in activities that promote feelings of racial knowledge, pride, and connection, it offsets racial discrimination's potentially negative impact on students' academic development. Maybe this is why you have these anti-critical race theory laws, and they're attacking teaching African-American history, African-American studies, etc. And they may not say that you can't teach it, but when they put laws in place, anti-critical race theory laws in place that are very ambiguous, it causes a fear among teachers where they oftentimes don't know what can be taught. So they will shy away from certain topics or avoid or not teach a lot of this history in the first place, because there's a fear from some people of us knowing the truth. And there's a fear of their children knowing the truth as well. So we also deal with the influence of Africa, especially ancient Kemet here in the United States. The Washington Monument is an ancient African symbol called a Tekken. There are about 1,200 Tekkenu all throughout ancient Kemet. Today, there are less than 12. And you have 3 that are in London. You have London, England, New York City, and Paris, France. There's a good article called Cleopatra's Needle, how 3 ancient Egyptian obelisks ended up in New York City, London, and Paris, France. And the Tekken, or the obelisk, that comes from the story of Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus. There were approximately 1,200 Tekkenu built in ancient Kemet, but only about a dozen are found in Egypt today. Many of the Tekkenu removed from Egypt are now in Istanbul, Turkey, London, England, Paris, France, Berlin, Germany, New York, Rome, Italy, Vatican City, and elsewhere throughout the world. The Tekkenu are now called obelisks by their new owners, and few know their origin or that they symbolize the resurrection of the African king Asar, who the Greeks called Osiris. Tony Browder talks about this on page 17 of Egypt on the Potomac. This is one of the books we use in the class also. Once again, you don't have to buy any of these books, but we use them as reference. And I do scan the pages, so we show you the page on the screen. Now, the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is a metaphor for the sun, which symbolizes knowledge. Okay, let's continue here, which symbolizes knowledge. So for eons, light was symbolized with knowledge and darkness was symbolized with ignorance. So when you talk about Europe being in the Dark Ages, it was referred to as a period of ignorance and raging civil wars and famine, things of this nature. All right, let's continue. Okay, so the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was first used to identify students who had completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet. Many Masonic temples were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light or knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. So the concept of going to a liberal arts college, that comes out of ancient Africa as well. And George G.M. James talks about this in the book Stolen Legacy. And he talks about the 7 liberal arts in the concept of getting your credentials in going to an institution of higher learning and getting your credentials in a series of steps, in a series of degrees, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. That comes out of the Nile Valley region of Africa also. Read Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder, pages 18 to 32. He talks about this. Now, Masonic temples are considered houses of learning or temples of learning. The term Mason or child of light is a direct reference to the highest degree of the Kemetic education system. The 33 degrees of instruction within Freemasonry represent a fraction, just a fraction of the 360 degrees of instruction that comprised the Kemetic system of education. Yet with less than 10% of the wisdom of ancient Kemet, Freemasons have held positions of influence and power throughout the world for over 200 years. Okay, read page 33. So we also look at things like why is Christmas celebrated on December 25th, because nowhere in the biblical text does it state that Yeshua or Jesus was born on December 25th. We look at the origins of Santa Claus coming from Sinterklaas, which is celebrated amongst the Dutch and, you know, in the Netherlands, and they have the celebration of Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet. Zwarte Piet means Black Pete, and Zwarte Piet was a Moor in this mythology. And they have the parade beginning in early November, going throughout the Netherlands, and they commemorate Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet coming from Spain into the Netherlands. All right, coming from Spain. Well, Spain is where the Moors going in 711 AD, led by General Tariq ibn Ziyad, going to the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so Spain is very important. Now, who were the Moors? The Moors' ancestors were known as the Garamantes. These were a Black African people living throughout North Africa. Hannibal Barca was Garamanti, as well as St. Augustine. The Moors, according to George G.M. James in the book Stolen Legacy, were the custodians of the ancient Egyptian mystery system. These teachings will bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. These teachings will bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. Now, the word Moor is derived from the Greek word moros, which literally means black or a very dark color. The Romans adopted this word and called them Mari, M-A-U-R-I, Mari. The Mari were a Northwest African people who were very dark-skinned. The Romans will refer to the region of Northwest Africa as Mauritania, Mauritania is Latin and means the land of the black-skinned people. You'll also see the term Marish. Now, the Romans would later adopt the word as a reference for the black-skinned inhabitants they encountered in Africa. Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, is another book that we use in the class. And if you look at pages 527 and 187, you'll see references for that information. Okay, so we go through and we look at some of the history of the Moors also. Runoko Rashidi had a really good article for AtlantaBlackStar.com called Moors, Saints, Knights, and Kings, the African Presence in Medieval and Renaissance Europe. We use 2 of Runoko's books in the class. This is one of the books here. This is Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe. Okay, Black Star, the African Presence in Early Europe. This is one of the books we use. And it deals with the history of the Moors in Europe. So the study of the African presence in history, whether in the African diaspora or Africa itself, is a really rewarding endeavor. In this study, we realized that slavery alone is not African history, and that African history is everybody's history. The history of African people, Black people, is rich and comprehensive, inspiring, and often known. Nowhere is this more the case than the African presence in medieval and Renaissance Europe. Now, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the Moors, as early as the Middle Ages and as late as the 17th century, were, quote, commonly supposed to be Black or very swarthy, and hence the word is often used for Negro, end quote. In the early 8th century, after a grim and extended resistance to the Arab invasions of North Africa, the Moors joined the triumphant surge of Islam. Following this, they crossed over from Morocco over to the Iberian Peninsula, where their swift victories and remarkable feats soon became the substance of legends. In July 710, Tarif, with 400 foot soldiers and 100 horses, all Berbers, successfully carried out a mission in southern Iberia. That was the reconnaissance mission, to get the lay of the land and see what's going on. Then Tariq goes in 711 AD. Tarif, an important city in southern Spain, is named after him. Then in 711 AD, Tariq ibn Ziyad goes in also, okay? And wasting no time to relish his victory, Tariq pushed on with his dashing and seemingly tireless Moorish cavalry to the Spanish city of Toledo. Within a month's time, General Tariq ibn Ziyad had effectively terminated European dominance of the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so we'll also talk about Ghana, Shanghai, and Mali. One of the things that I've added to the class, because I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017, is we'll also talk about Queen Nzinga of the modern day Angola, because we know that the documentary from executive producer Jada Pinkett Smith is on Netflix now, African Queens, and the first installment deals with Queen Nzinga. And one of my teachers, Professor James Small, was a consultant on the series. Okay, so when I interviewed him in January, we talked about Queen Nzinga, and we talked about the African Queen series also. We also talked about Godfather of Harlem, because he's the technical consultant. He's the historical consultant on Godfather of Harlem. So we definitely have to deal with Christopher Columbus in this class to get a better understanding of the spread of the transatlantic slave trade and the involvement of Spain, because the Spanish are the second ones. The Spanish are the second ones involved in the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, and we know the Portuguese are the first ones involved, and Spain and Portugal are right next to each other. Now, convinced that what was Columbus looking for? Convinced that he would find a new lucrative sea route to the Orient, to Asia, by sailing west to find silk, tea, spices, gold, etc. This was big business in the 15th century. Okay, Europeans lost their trading route to Asia because of the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks. Okay, so the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople and thus divert the trade in Eastern European slaves away from the Mediterranean to Islamic markets. The Italians increasingly look to North Africa as their source for slaves. All right. Now, Columbus never found that direct water route from the west going east that he was looking for. When we look at where he goes on his 4 voyages, he never comes to the land we call the United States of America. Okay, he goes into Cuba, Haiti, Puerto Rico, Honduras, Panama, the Bahamas, Hispaniola. The western third of the island of Hispaniola is where Haiti is, etc. He never comes to the land we call the United States of America. If you go to history.com and search for Columbus, they have a good chart there. It shows you where he went on his 4 voyages. Now, what was the transatlantic slave trade? And how is this different from the slave trade? Now, the widespread enslavement of diverse peoples for economic and political gain has played a fundamental role throughout human history in the development of nations. Ancient Greek and Roman societies operated by using slave labor, as did many European countries in the modern period. As early as the Middle Ages, Mediterranean cities were supplied with Moorish black slaves from Muslim countries in North Africa. By comparison, the slave trade is a term which has grown to be associated specifically with the transatlantic trade or the triangular trade that spanned for centuries, roughly 50, it goes back to 1441, but some people put it at 1518 because that deals with the Asiento de Negros of August 1518, signed by King Charles V of Spain, which drastically expands the transatlantic slave trade and increases the need for enslaved African labor. This involved three continents, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, and was responsible for human suffering on an unprecedented scale. Now Brazil doesn't abolish slavery to 1888. 1865 is when it is abolished in the United States, but Cuba doesn't abolish it. Cuba abolishes it in 1886, and it's 1888 in Brazil. Now, slavery comes to the New World. African slaves were first brought to the New World shortly after the discovery by Christopher Columbus of the so-called New World. Legend has it that one slave was included in his original crew and that they could be found on Hispaniola, the island of Hispaniola, a site of present-day Haiti, as early as 1501. Upon his arrival in the Bahamas, Columbus himself captured 7 of the natives for their quote-unquote education, that's what he said, on his return to Spain. However, the slave trade proper only began in 1518 when the first African cargo direct from Africa landed in the West Indies. This is after the Asiento de Negros. The importation of Africans to work in the Americas was the inspiration of the Spanish bishop Bartolomé de las Casas, whose support of black slavery was motivated by humanitarian concerns. And de las Casas is a bishop, Bishop Bartolomé de las Casas. He travels on some of the voyages with Columbus. He keeps a diary and he documents the atrocities that Columbus inflicts on the indigenous people. And he said that Columbus was responsible for killing 12 million to 25 million indigenous people. Okay, so he's going to advocate that they stop enslaving Native Americans, try to save their souls. They suffered enough, and enslave African people, okay, and white people to a lesser extent. He argued that the enslavement of Africans and even some whites, proving that in the early period, slavery did not operate according to exclusive racial demarcations. He argued that this would save the indigenous American Indian populations, which were not only dying out, but engaging in large-scale resistance as they opposed their excessively harsh conditions. As a result, King Charles V of Spain agreed to the Asiento de Negros, or slave trading license of 1518, which later represented the most coveted prize in European wars, okay, as it gave to those who possessed it a monopoly in slave trafficking. And this drastically expands the transatlantic slave trade, okay? All right, now we know there are at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. We were the anchor makers, artists, bakers, barrel makers, bartenders, basket makers, we dealt with decorative furnishing, we were jockeys, herb doctors, horse trainers, gardeners, brick makers, fishermen, engineers. The book of the Other Slaves, Mechanics, Artisans, and Craftsmen, 1978, by James Newton and Ronald Lewis, goes through and breaks this down. There were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. Okay, so this is just a sample of the type of information that we deal with in this 12-week online course that I teach. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. There's over 200 that we reference as well. Visit our website, theafricanhistorynetwork.com, theafricanhistorynetwork.com. And we have the information right on the homepage of the website. 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. So this class is on sale, $80 right now. Our next class is Saturday, March 4th, 2023, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register for the full course. So I do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. Even after the 12-line course is over with, you can go back and watch the entire course as much as you want to. You'll have full access. All right. And then we also have a bundle pack where you get both classes that I teach on sale for $120. That's a $300 value. There will be 5 of my lectures that will be in the video library when you log into your account, and you'll be able to watch 5 of my lectures as a free bonus as well. Now, the second class that I teach deals with history from 1800 to 1968. And this is Black resistance movements from the Haitian Revolution to the Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, and Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. So I teach this class on Sundays, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our next class is Sunday, March 5th, 2023. And with this course here, we study in depth this 168, 170 year period of history. Okay, this is a 12-week online course as well. Same structure as the first class. Click right here to register here. And we have to understand that history leading up to the Civil War, what led up to the Civil War taking place, but then also understand what happened after slavery ended as well. Okay, and this helps us understand how we got to where we are today. What were the laws and policies?